So let's talk a little bit about drafting the essay, creating that structure. We'll talk about a few elements that you'll want to keep in mind as you work to develop and draft your essay. The introduction serves some very important purposes. Not only does it give your audience a reason to read, grabbing their attention and hooking them, reeling them in, it also provides context for the academic conversation or topic that you're discussing. Oftentimes, an introduction provides a summary, and then, very importantly, an introduction includes a thesis. That thesis should be a clear, assertive statement of the author's intent, purpose, the point of the essay. It's different from a topic, and the thesis changes depending on the type of writing. You notice that in your narrative essay, your thesis was to describe why the experience was significant to you, why it mattered. In other essays, for instance, an argumentative or persuasive essay, your thesis is going to focus on convincing the reader to adopt or take on a perspective, or it will be a thesis that supports a particular position or perspective. There are many ways to open an essay, and the strategy that you use oftentimes depends on the purpose. The Norton Handbook contains many different strategies to open. I'm going to focus on just a few that can be particularly useful. One useful strategy is to connect to your reader's values and to look for shared experiences. When you establish common ground with your reader, you give him or her an immediate reason to pay attention. Sometimes you may want to establish that shared experience and that common ground immediately. You may want to show your reader that your experience is similar to the experiences of others. Your textbook includes an interesting example on page 304 of an appeal to reader values from an essay titled Airport Security, What Price Safety? The writer starts this way. We all want to feel safe. Most Americans lock their doors at night, lock their cars in parking lots, try to park near buildings or under lights, and wear seatbelts. Many invest in expensive security systems, carry pepper spray or a stun gun, keep guns in their homes, or take self-defense classes. Obviously, safety and security are important issues in American life. And so in this example, the author is using the shared experience of feeling safe, of safety, which is actually one of Maslow's needs on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Safety is an important universal need and universal value. So the author is trying to grab the reader's attention in that case by saying, we all care about this. You can place yourself as part of this group that I'm writing about. Oftentimes, we start essays with a question. Have you ever blank? Now, this may work really well in a speech, but in a piece of writing where you don't have synchronous conversation, that type of question can fall flat. However, that doesn't mean that questions don't work. If you look on page 305 of the Norton Guide, you'll see an example from Evelyn Fox Keller in an essay titled Women in Science, a Social Analysis. That author uses a question. Are women's minds different from men's minds? Notice there that I am asking the reader a question, but I'm not saying, do you think women's minds are different from men's minds? Notice that the question is more universal, more broad. Anybody can sort of think about and answer that. An anecdote or story or description oftentimes can actually serve as a very good opener. Sometimes that brief narrative, that brief story, as you've already learned, because it's so human and it's so relatable, can bring a topic to life for your reader. Consider using a story or an anecdote, could be your own, could be someone else's, as a way to open. Let's let's talk a little bit about your thesis statement. Now, you may be familiar with this term, you may not be familiar with this term. Essentially, what you need to understand about a thesis is that first, it changes depending on purpose. There are steps you can take to construct one. And also, the thesis is critical to an essay. It provides guidance. Everything in an essay relates to the thesis. So the thesis is that basic idea that your entire essay supports or develops. And that's what I mean by everything in your essay has to relate to your thesis. Essentially, your thesis is a container. Right? It contains your main points and it contains your perspective. And anything that you put into that container, any detail, any piece of evidence, any story, all of that has to relate to and fit inside of that container. It is an assertive statement. It is not a question. A thesis is not a question. A thesis is the answer to that question. And that's really what I mean by assertive. All content in an essay, as I've mentioned, has to relate to the thesis. It should develop or expand on or clarify the thesis in some way, shape, or form. And the thesis itself should be broad enough to contain all of the ideas in an essay. I want to share with you a formula that you can use to construct and develop a thesis. It's a very, very simple equation. Your subject plus your main point about your subject, a thesis. And so why is it important to have not just the subject, but also the main point? It's because your thesis is one perspective. It's your position. Even when you're writing a narrative, you're still indicating that that experience affected you or changed you in a specific way. It's your experience, so it's your main point. It's debatable. So that's what makes a thesis unique, the fact that it is debatable, that you're not just talking about a subject, you are actually making a point about that subject that someone may agree with or disagree with. So let's look at this example. Diabetes can be managed through diet and exercise. And here I have a subject and then a main point about the subject. Can we say that this is a thesis? Is this a debatable, assertive statement that's broad enough to cover in an essay and that includes not only a subject but the main point about the subject? The answer here is yes. So we have one subject, it's broad enough to discuss in an essay, and then I have a main point I'm making about the subject, the fact that diabetes can be managed through diet and exercise. Someone might argue or debate against that. So it's my perspective, it's what I'm supporting. Now, would this be a strong thesis? Diabetes is a disease. Now, in this example, I definitely have a subject, diabetes, but am I really making a point about the subject? Not really. I am essentially just stating a fact that it is a disease. So in this case, the statement would need revision in order to be an assertive thesis statement. And in this case, can diabetes be cured without medicine? I have a question. Can a question be a thesis? Not generally. You want it to be an assertive, direct statement. So if I change this to diabetes can be cured without medicine, that would be moving closer to a thesis statement.